Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us on whatever platform you're listening to us on, wherever in the world you are listening to us from. I say it every episode. I'll continue to say it. Thank you so much for the support and for listening. Today's topic is one that every coach has experienced, regardless of which sport that you have coached, because we're going to talk today about some late game execution. Our guest is going to talk about coaching in tight games and how to come back or hold on to that lead down the stretch when that game really starts to tighten up. We're going to get into some late game X's and O's execution, as well as ways to mentally prepare your team ahead of time so that they're ready when those end of game situations come up. So hopefully, this interview is going to help you, the listener, close out those tough games this year and win those ones that are a coin flip down the stretch. My guest today is the head coach at South Bend, Washington. I'm very happy to be joined by Coach Ryan Varga. Coach, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk hoops.
Always a pleasure to have people talking hoops as well. I'm doing quite well. Coach, let's go ahead and get started with your journey. Where has the game of basketball taken you? Where's your coaching journey taken you? And what's led you to South Bend, Washington?
Just kind of started off. I'm born and raised in South Bend. Grew up around the South Bend Clay program, which won the '94 state championship. My uncle was that coach. So picked up the coaching bug early of wanting to play and coach by watching him. Grew up, played basketball for 4 years, and decided not to go to college to play basketball, but decided that I was going to go to Valparaiso University. And I was very blessed right off the bat my freshman year to get kind of into coaching right away, as a little small school named Boone Grove asked me to, be a fifth grade coach. And I started there, and next thing you know, I was sixth grade, and then, you're sixth grade and a varsity assistant. Next thing you know, I was in eighth grade, and then, still varsity assistant, and then head assistant. And I was around 22, around there, 21, 22, kind of developed a name for myself. I had a few head coaching interviews at some of the small schools out there. Thank God I wasn't hired, because I was nowhere near ready. But I was very fortunate just to work under a successful coach. And I moved back to South Bend because my teaching position got cut. Started JV here at Washington under Chad Johnston, and moved to head assistant, and was an assistant of his for 7 years before he moved, and kind of fell into my lap as far as, just being around the school and working in the building. And, I was named interim coach. And after my first year, we took that title off, and we've been hitting the ground running ever since. So this will be my 5th year coming up.
Awesome. And I want to ask, since you said that you grew up in the area, what is that like, kind of making that transition from, growing up and playing to now on the coaching side? Do you see like coaches that you were, playing against when you were a player? Like what's that transition like now that you're kind of on the other side of things?
Well, not as much that some assistants I've played against, guys that I've played against are head coaches other places. For me, it's more like guys I've played with and families I've gone close to throughout my years. Their kids are starting to come up. So that's kind of a weird transition. Their kids or little brothers or, things of that nature. And now that I've been around so long, guys that I've coached against as they were players are now starting to become coaches. Actually, 2 of my assistants are former players that I coached against. So it's kind of a fun circle. It's kind of like a circle of life in this game. You if you've been around long enough, you're able to see, it evolve and see a lot of people grow up. And it's been fun overall, though. It's great for the city to, just to see that and be a part of it.
That's cool. It's like you literally have like the next generation coming in, and you kind of like see that changing of the guards sort of thing. I think that's really cool. That's awesome. I love coaches that have things such as like their mantra or whatever their philosophy or their statement is. I love getting into that, and you're no different. I see it on your social media. You got a hashtag and it says Panther Way on it. So I have to ask before we get into our topic, what does that term mean for you and your program?
I mean, really, it means everything. When I first started, like I said, I worked under a great head coach that really was more than basketball. It was always about your grades, your attendance, and things. So when we took over, we said, all right. And when I took over, I was like, hey, how can we brand this? How can we make it, something when people, see it, that they know that they're talking about South Bend, Washington, boys basketball. And that's what we did my first year. We just we started calling it the Panther Way. It's just something we live by. It's about accountability, trust, and togetherness. We talk a lot about not having entitlement. It's sitting the first two seats in class instead, or first three rows in class instead of in the back. Being on time, being 10 minutes early. We call it Panther time. Being 10 minutes early to practice to get through stuff, and it's just really kind of taken off. Really, there's a lot of Panther Way shirts around floating around South Bend, which is kind of fun to see. But it's getting something that the kids can buy into, live by. It's not just one thing. It's just kind of a trickle about everything, the way you carry yourself on the floor. We were very fortunate to have 8 exemplary reports from referees and IHSAA reps throughout this last year alone. So I think it really just is the way we operate. And if you can sum it up into a phrase, it's great. And we kind of go from there. So we just kind of call it the Panther Way. And the kids have really dived into it, and our coaching staff have dove into it, and it's taken off. So it's we're stuck with it, and it's going to be around for a long time. And they get a packet of every year, a binder of what the Panther Way is, and we go through it. And honestly, the more you can do it. And I have an assistant coach talking about academic pieces or designing an academic portion of it. So we're trying to evolve it every year, and it's gotten better. So hopefully, a long time down the road, it'll be something that will stick.
And so the way that you describe it, I am envisioning that at your school, like the faculty and the staff could probably just like pick out who like the basketball players are just by like the way they conduct themselves and the way that they behave. I feel like it's either getting to, or maybe already in some extent has already kind of like gotten to that point based on those things that you're emphasizing.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something we've prided ourselves on the last, like I said, I've been here, this will be my 5th year, the last 4 years, of the way our kids carry ourselves and in the building and in the community, and the way they do, they like to do stuff for the community. Last year we did a teddy bear drive. So that was for the children's hospital. So, just trying to find different ways to, that they can, show themselves in a manner other than on the court. And yeah, definitely it does. We do stick out like sore thumbs sometimes in school.
Well, if you had to think of a reason to stand out like a sore thumb, it's good that it's a positive one. So that's the best way to stick out, I think. Awesome.
Yeah.
So our topic today, as we mentioned at the beginning, is going to talk a little bit about late game execution. So this is kind of a broad topic. So we're going to kind of start here, just kind of in maybe a more specific kind of scenario type sense. So in your experience, and I know you've coached for quite a while, can you take us through a couple scenarios of kind of, let's start with when your team is up here. So you're up 4 to 6 points, you got a few minutes left to play. I know that this changes a lot depending on maybe circumstance and who you're playing, but in general, when you're at the point where you're kind of holding on to a lead late, what are you kind of looking for, or what are some things that you're looking to try and close that game out?
I think obviously, any late game scenario is obviously full of tension. And I think as coaches, we forget that especially high school coaches that we're coaching 14 to 17, 18-year-olds, that are going to be a little bit more tense than even us as adults. But I think overall, I think there's 2 things that you can do at the end of the game that is vital. And you can obviously play to win, and you can play to lose. And I mean that by what I'm saying is sometimes I think as coaches, we get up yeah, we do want to hold the ball, and we talk about, we don't want to take a shot, or we want to make them foul, or things like that. And I think sometimes we take our kids out of a rhythm and make it a little bit more tense from that. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes you can play to lose in that sense. So up
Sure.
4, really at the end of the game, whether we said a minute or two, left. I think for me as a standpoint, I'm telling my kids to obviously have an understanding of what a good shot and a bad shot is. And you have to have that regular on, but we also are looking for the, probably the easiest look, the best look we can get. If obviously it's a minute left, we're obviously going to probably maybe go into a stall or go into something with that, or, the shot clock's coming on. So that'd be something different to talk about on how you'd work with that. Obviously, you would probably go to a good set that you could probably get a bucket or get in your players' hands that you could for sure get a good look to push it back. But I think being up 4 for us is always a standpoint of, one, we got to take care of the ball. 2, we'll probably run our motion offense, and we're going to look for the best shot available. And if we don't have, and with no shot clock in Indiana, if we don't necessarily have to get a look and they have to foul us, we're okay with that. And it depends which lineup we have. You start going to offense and defense in those lineups. But I think overall, for me and over the course of years, I think sometimes I've made a big mistake by making it a big deal.
You and me
And
both.
that puts pressure on the kids. And, so we just try to stay relaxed and run our stuff. And obviously these are things that you've worked on and going through these situations. And these are some things I know for me personally, I know I'm going to make a big effort this year to do this almost every day. And whether you're up 4, with a minute left, up 6 with a minute left, down 6, I think as coaches, this is something that we have to do, put in our practice plan almost every day to make it a comfortable situation for kids. So
because you brought up a good point about the way that your team plays, and like you mentioned about, like, sometimes you can get to the point where you're like playing not to lose as opposed to trying to win. Does your style of play, or the tempo that you want to play in, or even like the offense that you run, does it lend itself to where it could even kind of stall things out? Or have you gotten into situations where it's like, well, we have to play at this certain pace because if we try and slow things down, it's not going to be beneficial or playing to the strengths of our team?
I think it also it comes with your experience with your team. This last year my team was very young, and if we're going to stall, there's a good chance that we're probably going to turn the ball over. And but whereas the years before I've had kind of veteran-led teams, or I was fortunate to coach some really good kids that were all state honors, and you feel a little bit more comfortable at the end of the game because the ball is in their hands. They're not going to make a mistake, and they're going to take care of it and make a good decision. So I think it does depend on the style that you play. Obviously, if you've ever watched us play, we are a very defensive oriented team, as far as we're going to try and get after you and push up the pace and push the tempo so we can get out on the floor and run. Do we want to necessarily, like last year, we struggled in the half court. So, us holding the ball for a long period of time wouldn't have been beneficial for us. We would have probably either looked to go to a quick hitter of some sort, or if we did delay, it would have to be, with a certain amount of time, or depending on how many fouls and how many timeouts the other team has. I might have, if I had enough timeouts, I might have let seconds go off and burn one, just to kind of take care of the basketball. But I do think the tempo you play does have something to say about the start at the end of the game, because if you are an up-tempo team, it's very hard, and you're not a really good half-court team, you're not going to win the game in the half-court. You're probably going to lose it. So
slowing it down like that could really cause some issues.
And like I said, it all depends, on the experience of the guys that you have on the floor, the level of talent that you have on the floor. If you have a team that can handle the ball, or do you got guys that are more role players that you put them in positions where they're not dribbling, and there's so many factors that can come into play at the end of the game. So I really, it's all about personnel. It's all about experience, and it really is all about what's your philosophies at the end of the game, or what's your philosophies overall? I do think our team, as they've shown this spring and summer, we've made leaps and bounds in the half court. So I would be a little bit more open to flowing into our half court offense, our motion, knowing our guys would probably get a good look and knowing that they know what a good shot and a bad shot. Whereas last year we'd probably jack up something that we probably didn't need, and I'd be pulling my hair out.
Well, I can imagine, as you mentioned about having a younger team and maybe a team that's less experienced, that if you try to, switch up what you're trying to do at the end of the game, if your team, especially a younger one, if they're not comfortable with that or they've never done it before, I feel like that's going to just greatly increase their opportunities to make mistakes or second guess themselves if they feel like they're doing something the last 3 minutes of a game that they weren't doing the first, however many minutes. Like that in and of itself could possibly cost you a game. At least I know in my experience it has.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as all coaches, we've done that before, where we've tried to play it safe and we got caught, and it backfired. And I know I've done it, and I'm sure I've watched coaches do it, and I think we can all admit that we've done it. It's just kind of, you have to learn through your failures. And I think, the only way you can really, understand that situation is to be put in that situation. So that's why I said, some of the mistakes I've made over the years is maybe I've thought my team would, prevail, or I thought we'd be okay. And maybe we didn't practice it as much as we possibly should have. So, I do think that it's very important to play those scenarios out in practice, almost, throughout the week, and see how it goes. And do it against teams that, that teams that are going to trap, so you can practice it, teams that run zone, so you can practice it. And I know for me, it always has helped out if having a quick hitter that we have in our kind of back pocket at the end of the game that we can go to, for those situations.
Yeah, always good to have those. And we'll definitely touch on that here in a little bit as well, kind of the setting something up and getting a good set play out of it. Now on the opposite end, if you're down, let's say 4-6 at the end of the game, do you look for, maybe in that opportunity that you're going to want to set something up? Is there a certain sense of maybe urgency or certain style of maybe a defense that you're going to switch into? This kind of blends into another question about, letting your kids play versus wanting to set something up. But in general, what do you feel, or how are you kind of thinking as a coach when, let's say, you're, only down 4-6 and you got a couple minutes left?
I think the biggest thing is to not to panic, when you're down is the best thing, because you don't have to. I think you get down like 3 and kids instantly think that they need a 3. We got to tie it. We got to tie it. I think the biggest thing is that when you're down 6, it's like any being down, whatever, down 10, down 12, you have to have a goal, like by this time we want to be down 6. By this time we want to be down 4. I think so. Relaying that message for the kids is crucial in that time period. I think for us, I think we're solid enough defensively, even in man. Obviously, we might try and speed you up a little bit, maybe trap you here and there, or we have different play calls where we trap different things. So we might try to catch you off guard on there. But if we're down like 4 or 5 or 6 with like 2 or 3 minutes to play, we're probably going to play pretty solid and hope that we can get a stop. Not look to gamble and offer up a 3 off a trap or a missed rotation. So we'd probably play, from my standpoint, we'd play pretty solid. Just trying to make you shoot a tough shot and go from there. Now, some people will go to, they're comfortable with it. They might go to a stall, at that time period. So you might have to switch up to a half court trap or call one of your, design schemes of trapping schemes out. And you got to kind of, play with it. But I think for me, being down 6, like with 2-3 minutes left, or 4-6, I'm not looking to panic anytime soon. We're gonna try and get a stop. Even if they score, we're gonna try and get it in real quick and get a quick bucket right back at you and be down 4 again. So I don't think there's any cause to panic being down 4-6 with like 2 minutes left. As it starts wearing and cutting down, then you start looking at your half court traps and your trapping schemes, and then looking at guys that you can foul, how many fouls you have to give. Maybe, if you're down in the foul count, maybe you can gamble a little bit more and try and get a steal off that. And if you foul, you foul. But those are some factors I'd look at down the stretch being down. Do you force them to call a timeout and, then you switch it up, or, do they call a timeout because they can't score or they're getting in trouble. So do you switch then, go to a half court trap? That's all chess games that coaches play, and it all depends on who you're playing, the personnel you're playing, the guys that they have in their team, and can they shoot free throws? So, those are all different things that you got to look at going down the stretch. But I'm a firm believer in not panicking when you're down. If you're down 15, the basketball is a game of runs. So,
Sure.
You can be down 15 1 minute, and next thing you know, you're down 6 or down 2. So I think the biggest thing is to stay composed. Like I said, shot selection becomes a little bit more of an emphasis when you're down. Obviously you don't want to come in just down here and fire the first 3. You want to get the best look and the best shot to move, and there's nothing wrong with attacking the basket at the end of the game, and instead of going for the 3, the old fashioned and one is, still 3 points.
Sure.
So those are different things that I look at down the stretch. I don't know if you want anything more specific, but
well, I wanted to ask, because you and I are partners in this sense, that in Arizona we don't have a shot clock either, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how not having a shot clock is kind of affects the way that you go about things. In your experience, when there's only a couple minutes left, are teams really holding on to the ball? Do you feel like you have to put more pressure, that they'll just try and bleed out the rest of the clock? How does not having a shot clock kind of affect some things for you towards the end of the game?
against a good fundamental team, a team that does not make mistakes, and they can hold on to the ball for that long, and either what's in their stall or within their offense, they can wear you down. It's a nightmare. You're at the mercy of them. So that instantly is desperation mode for us, because that will put us in a half court trap, or put us in a situation where now we're gambling or we're trying to foul, just to stop the clock, so we have a chance to even put points on the board. So it can be a nightmare against fundamental teams that are really good senior led teams, that are very fundamental, that they just take care of the basketball, and they don't turn the ball over throughout the game, let alone the last couple of minutes, and they got good free throw shooters. That's a nightmare against unskilled and undisciplined teams. No shot clock. Chances are the more they have the ball, the better. I mean, they're going to turn it over eventually, or they're going to end up getting antsy and take a bad shot. So you make them work offensively, it can become a weapon for you almost, or and go there. And there's still some teams that still don't. I mean, they still take 10 seconds to score, shoot. So
Yeah.
for us, you see it on both. I've seen it on both views. I've seen it where it can be a nightmare when you have teams that they want a low scoring game and you want to speed it up, and I've seen it where fast-paced teams struggle with it, because if you make them work past what would be a normal shot clock, they are eventually going to throw it away. I've used both takes on it. I've slowed down faster teams than us, and so I can see where that comes from too. But it's definitely something that Indiana has to talk about, and it's something that needs to change. I think
Same here.
I think we're doing a disservice to these kids that are going to play at the next level, and not having a shot clock. And I've kind of been an advocate for it, and I will continue to be an advocate for it. And people say, well, they're going to take bad shots. And I'm like, well, most teams aren't waiting 35 seconds to shoot anyway, so they're already taking bad shots. So this might actually help them understand possession and what's a good shot and a bad shot. So, I think if anything, it makes coaches coach better, and I think they will make the players play better.
And going back to, facing teams that are really well fundamentally sound versus some teams that are a little bit more hectic. I mean, as a coach, I'm assuming then, either just through knowing in advance, which coaches are playing against, or just from seeing them play in the first half or film that you've seen, is that must be something that you can detect right away, where like, okay, you as a coach know, like, if this game is getting down close, I know how this team is most likely going to conduct themselves based on kind of the research and what I've
Yeah.
already seen from this team. So that's kind of like a little pre-planning. So you kind of, in a way, do you kind of like keep that in the back of your mind, knowing, all right, if it gets close, I know like what this team is probably going to be about towards the end.
Yeah, and I'm that comes back to scouting, and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very big at watching huddle, but I have a really good assistant in Will Kramer that when I say he puts together a scouting report, I thought I put together good scouting reports as an assistant. He tops me. Um, but that comes down to all preparation and knowing teams, knowing coaches. I think if any coach, you start to become familiar with those in your conference. And you see them a little bit more, those coaches in your sectional. So obviously you've watched more games that they've played and you've seen situations that they're in. And it comes down to knowing their personnel too. So guys that you can trap at the end of the game by about the third or fourth film, know who guys you're going to foul at the end of the game. You always keep those type of things in back pocket. And if Max Press has stats and the team puts stats on, you look at their shooting, their field goal percentages and their free throw percentages. So it does come into a play with if I know a team that is going to stall and pull us out, then you're probably looking at practicing. All right, if we get down this is what we're going to. So that's something that you definitely have in your back pocket. You definitely have in the back of your mind. It's all preparation, and of what you do and how much film you watch, how much you scout the other team. And I will say, I think I with our program, we pride ourselves in that we do know the other team very well to understand what's going to happen at the end, whether it's even at the end of the quarter. You talk about late game situations, but let's talk about late clock situations.
Yeah.
At the end of the first quarter, what are they going to go to? Are they going to stall? Do they stall and go into a certain action? Those are things that you look at too, and a lot of it coincides and goes to the fourth quarter. So, and that's a very good question that you asked, and it's I think it's something that all coaches need to be a little bit conscious of is your preparation versus your opponent.
Yeah. Yeah. And that will keep you as a coach, I think, a lot more composed and a lot more gathered and a lot more together in those late game situations, so that you already have that information at your disposal and you're not like scrambling to try and figure out who to foul or how to do any of that. You kind of have that ready, and as you mentioned, great assistants will really put you at ease too. They can do a lot to help you for sure.
Yep.
How do you, in your experience, and maybe it's changed over the years, balance as the game gets tighter, letting your kids play versus when you feel like you need to call a timeout and specifically set something up when the game's, really getting tight there at the end? Does it depend on who your personnel is, or there's certain situations you look for? What is that thought process like?
It's kind of changed over the years. I think for the most part, I've been more open to letting them play, and letting them make maybe putting them in an action, but letting them make the decision at the end of the game, whether it's a high flat ball screen or, I'm running somebody off a screen for a shot. I think if it's, there's different situations, like if the momentum you scored or, you've gotten a good stop and you don't want to, and, you're at home when the crowd's starting to go wild and you might be tied or, you might be down one, you kind of don't want to take that momentum from them and kind of just, that's a lot of pressure of defense when you let them play and you're making you're asking your guys to make a play. I was very fortunate early on to have a couple very good point guards. One that was at such a young age started, varsity as a sophomore. He played varsity as a sophomore. So by the time he was a senior, he had already known everything that I probably wanted. So most of the time we could just call it an action. And I would trust him to make the right decision and take us home. Even my second year, I'd probably be more of a timeout coach. Whereas at the end of the game, we weren't as efficient as far as our decision making. So I would, call a timeout and set something up. Last year, as a young team, I would have called as many timeouts as possible to get us into something that we needed to. But I think it comes. I talk a lot about so far as your experience and your personnel, and it comes from a feel for the game. If you feel that your players are the best players out there and they can make plays over the other team, then sometimes you got to let them make plays.
Sure.
As coaches, sometimes we can overcoach and overcoach in that situation. In those type of situations, we've all done it. I've done it. But I think for me overall, my philosophies have always kind of been, unless we need a certain kind of bucket or we're struggling to score. But if the momentum's on our side, I'm gonna let my kids make plays and let them take us home. And I have confidence in what their skill set is and what they can do, and we go from that. But there's been plenty of times where I've called timeouts and set something up, if we needed a 3 or I'm kind of a gambler. My coaches that I coach against would probably use this against me now, but if I'm down 2 sometimes on the road and it's been a tough game, I'm trying to get out of there with a win as best in regulation, so we might go for the home run if we got, we think we have a good shot at it. I trust my kids. So.
Yeah. And, there's nothing wrong with that either, kind of going for it. If it's a good look, it's a good look. And I think one of the toughest things for a lot of coaches, but probably specifically younger coaches or newer coaches, is sort of kind of whether they choose to let them play or, they draw something up and it doesn't work out, is the ability to kind of like move on from that and not let it, completely derail them, I guess, or have to, kind of relive it and, keep letting it eat at them and just kind of move on. In your experience, and I've been there too, I can speak about mine as well. Like when, things don't work out for whatever reason it is, it's a tight game and, well, you lose that one. How have you kind of worked over the years on just sort of getting to the next game and also kind of just getting your team ready for the next game and just being able to put that in the past behind you?
I think early on, like when I first became head coach, it was very hard for me to move on to certain things. I think any coach at the end of the game, whether you win or lose, your reflection on that game is going to take some time. You're going to go home and reflect on it. I know for a fact I go home. I don't watch film every time I go home, but I know when I lay my head down to sleep, I can visualize plays on things that we did wrong or things that maybe I could have changed myself, or maybe I should have called a timeout there. Maybe I shouldn't have. But I think overall, just for a success standpoint, and I talk about this with my kids all the time, we talk about this. I shouldn't say we as assistants and coaches. Sure. I don't like to be possessive over it because it's just as much as
of course
my assistance program as it is mine. So we talk about all the time on how we respond to everything. That's our biggest thing. We you hear coaches say next play a lot. I tell my kids, if I don't care if you make mistakes, we don't care if you make mistakes. We want you to, learn from them. Now, if you're making 2 to 3 of them in a row, now we got to come back and have a conversation about them. But, as long as you're doing what you at a fast pace at the best you can do, we got to move on from it. Let's move on to the next play. So I think, losses and wins at the end of games, it also depends, whether you have a game the next day or maybe you have a game in the next 2 days. Sometimes when you lose, you can let it marinate a little bit longer. And sometimes when you win, you can let it linger a little bit longer, but I think overall, it's all about your preparation and it's over. When it's over, it's over. We got to learn from it and we got to move forward. And because you can't stand there and, relive it. You can't replay it. So I think that's the biggest thing the hardest thing to get kids to understand. And even sometimes you as a coach is to understand that, there's always the next game, and at the end of the season now, if it's sectional time and tournament time, you might not have another game, but you got to constantly keep moving forward. And that's just not in basketball, and that's in life because, so many things are thrown at you throughout the day. And if you're stuck on that, 32 minutes of a game, then, we got issues. There's a lot of bigger stuff out there that is, and I think if anything, Monty Williams taught us that right after he lost the finals. He's in the Bucks locker room congratulating them.
Sure.
And I think one of the phrases he said is, you guys made us a better team. I thought that to me was powerful. And I think as our coaches, we need to all look at something like that, instead of feeling sorry for ourselves, and, take what's positive out of it and flip it for our kids and flip it for ourselves. So we can move forward and be better.
No, yeah, that is a perfect example. And I think too, that's also really important, even on wins. Sometimes I know I've had, real tight ones that we've pulled out and won. And I feel like we didn't move on well enough as a team from that. And we let that almost linger too long, and we didn't move on. And next thing you know, you come out flat in the next game because, just didn't quite move on the way that we needed to. So I think it does kind of go both ways, where regardless of what happens, like I think we just kind of mentioned about, you kind of have to like learn from it, take something away from it, and just be able to kind of get after it the next day or whenever the next practice is going to be. So one of the things that you brought up a couple of times, and I did want to make sure we got back to it, is making sure that your team is prepared and they're composed and they're as comfortable as they can be when those tight games do end up occurring. So you mentioned a little bit about things about preparation and practices in particular. So what are some things that you and your staff do in your practices that maybe build that up in your team so that the moment isn't so overwhelming for them when it actually comes to a game?
Well, I think, and I will say this, we haven't done it enough, and I keep saying it, and it's one of the things
we're learning. It's all good.
I've kind of praised on, I've kind of thought about over the summer a lot, is I think there's no better, you do a lot of things where, you make things competitions in practice, and we do a very good job of, keeping the flow of practice going. But I do think, situation wise, whether you're down, you're down 8 with 4 minutes left, you're down 15 with 6 minutes left, I think those are tremendous teaching tools for your kids. And not only, does your team that you're coaching, both teams are getting exposure on how to play, at those levels. When you're up, and nobody talks about being up 15, no one talks about how to play when you're up 15, that's always like when you're down. I think it's almost as just important to talk about when you're up 20, when you're up 15, how are you going to play? How do you sustain the lead? I know we like to talk, you got a lead now, you're up 8-9, now how can you take it further? How can you make it 15? How can you make it 20? So I think those are excellent practice points in practice to do, and have that where it's officiated, by your coaching staff of, maybe you're on the road and you get tough calls. All right, how do you fight through that adversity? I think the more adversity you give the kids in practice, the better it is. And the more you can get them to go through that adversity, and overcome it, the more confident they're going to be. I think a lot of kids that I deal with our dynamic, we have to learn that. We have to learn how to get through adversity, and not just on the court, just in life. When things go bad, we can't let it snowball into 25 million things. So I think the best practice tool is to put your kids in that situation. I know at times I've worn them out and said, all right, well, now you're up 5. Now you got to hold on to the lead. Your dog tired. Can you, oh, it's 1-1. Can you shoot free throws? Make everything a 1-1. Then kids get comfortable at the line too. So I think putting your kids in those situations as much as possible in practice is the best way to do that. You're 2 minutes left, you're up 4. 2 minutes left, you're up 8. 2 minutes left, it's a tie ball game. And that also gets them comfortable for you. And that also, as a coach, helps you understand what type of team that you have. Are you going to need to call timeout in that time period? Can you call out a play call or an action, and do they execute it? So I think in those moments you find out a lot about your team. I know I'm excited, this upcoming season, to, like I said, we've gotten a lot better over the spring and summer, just fundamentally, and a better understanding of basketball. I'm excited to put them through those situations this winter and, see what they can do. And I also think it's a great tool to have your assistants coach through.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's a builder to get them ready too for if they want to be a head coach, have the one on the other team coaching. Sometimes I like to, if you guys are coaching today, you coach this team, you coach that team, so I think it's a good, just a building process for all involved, head coaches, assistant coaches, and players, to be put in that situation and be put in those times that have adverse moments. And, you kind of find out a lot about yourself and your team. So I say practice it as much as possible. And I said something to the factor that we're probably going to do it every day. Whether it's being up 15 and coming down 15, just to get in those realms of knowing how to get through and how to overcome them, and what we're looking for. And I think and I know with at least from our ends, when we've done it in the past in our practices, our kids get really competitive with it.
So I think that's big, is that they probably get really into it. And then it's probably the way that you kind of create that environment, and the way that you handle that environment in practice. You make it as game-like as possible. And I would assume that the more competitive those situations are, and the more realistic those situations are in practice, when you do call a timeout in a game, it's just like a quick reference. It's literally just like we practice. It's the exact situation we prepared for, right? And then hopefully that'll take just a little bit, of the anxiety off, because they've, in a sense, right, already been through that sort of situation.
Yeah. And then if you have to, sometimes you draw something up on the fly and you see if they can execute it. Can you take what we do, what I drew up on the board, and, can you, put it out on the floor? Sometimes you can't go to a quick hitter, or you have to make an adjustment as a coach or draw something up on the fly. So, the more you can put your kids in that situation and have them be comfortable with it, that's very important. And as a coach, it's important to you, because, you might find something about yourself at the, in those practices that you're not very good at drawing stuff up on the fly, so it's a good self-assessment all the way around. And I think, like I said, I know for me, from my standpoint, I'm definitely going to be doing a lot more of it in practice. I'm going to try and at least a portion of it, almost every day. So hopefully my assistants listen to this and they hold me accountable.
That's good. That's a good accountability tool right there. You saying it right there and having them listen to it. That's funny. Yeah. What is your take on the idea of like captains, or having people that you would like designate as leaders, as people like, okay, it's a tight game, so you pull like a particular player aside and you're like, you gotta help lead this team, or I'm putting all this trust on you. Do you buy into something like that? Is it more of like a whole team thing? What's your take on that?
I think that's something that I've kind of, you always talk about your seniors being your captains because they've been a long time, but I think as time's gone by, I've noticed that sometimes just your oldest guy is not your captain. He's not your veteran guy. Your best player at all times isn't your captain. I think leadership in that sense is kind of earned as a player. Guys that you can. I have guys on my team, right? I mean, if we had I talked back to a kid that I coached my first year. His name was Corey McKinney. He was first in every drill. He never had to worry about what he was doing, in the classroom. He was the first to practice. He's, first in sprints. I kept saying he was just a leader, and he was very vocal, and he made everybody around him better, and he made everybody around him, compete, and he made everybody, you just gravitated towards him. And the team, a lot of times he would speak up and everybody listened. So, and I've had guys that have tried to do that role, but it's just not for them. So I think it depends on, the type of culture you guys have. And I think we have a family type culture, but, right now, one of my better players is not vocal at all. So I don't ask him to be, I ask him to lead in other ways. You lead by your play, you lead by, diving on the floor or taking a charge, that's your leadership. Or running the floor, sprinting, in a drill, lead with that nature. And I got another guy that's very vocal, and he's learning how to be vocal and how to be positive with his teammates. So it's all about the trust and the work that you have. I think a lot of times as coaches, we want guys to be captains because they're either older or they might be the best player.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that leadership role is defined by that. I really think it's defined by who you are every day, and the way you speak to your teammates is huge, and how you receive your teammates is huge. And we talked about that all the time. How do you receive your teammates when they say this and that, or how would you receive it if they brought something to your attention? If you make a mistake and you brought something to their attention. So at the end of the game, I'm trusting. I think you always have that relationship with your point guard too, because he handles the ball. And as a head coach, if your point guard and you are not on the same page, then you got issues.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the stage, I'm trusting my point guard to know what I want and understand what I want. And I'm right now developing, spending a lot of time with my two guys that are probably going to be running point, just, watching film and picking brains. And, we're going to be doing that all fall. And I pulling them aside. I've been trying to pull them aside a lot more and talk to them. And I think that overall at the end of the game, you're probably going to trust your point guard to call something out if you have it, or the guy that you want to have the ball at the end of the game. You're gonna go through that process with him. But it comes with practicing it too, and to be a leader, it takes practice and it takes reps, and it takes understanding from the head coach and the assistants what you want from them. I've had guys in the past that for sure I'm calling something out. I trust you to say something, or I trust you to call something out. So do it and I'll roll with it. And if it's something I don't like, maybe I'll call timeout, or I'll call something else out, and you adapt. But I think overall, as coaches, we need to make sure that our captains and our leaders are the guys that that aren't just the oldest or are the best players. That sometimes it can be your bench player that's the most vocal. Mm-hmm. So I put my apples and on my I don't know the phrase I was gonna say, but I kind of put all my stock in kind of a feel for the game and a feel for my players and going from there. But I keep saying this. I'm excited to see, because I have a very fun group and a young group that's going to be all juniors next year. They all played as sophomores, and they've grown. And I've been interested to see how their leadership is in different ways. So it's definitely going to be fun to even see who the team decides is going to be the captain next year. So.
Well, it sounds like one of the things that is going to be really beneficial is you talked about watching film. And I think watching film with your players, maybe specifically your point guard, is kind of building their own basketball IQ. And the more, or I guess the higher their basketball IQ is, the more trust that you'll have that they kind of can read the situation, especially towards the end of the game, and really kind of know what needs to happen or what needs to be done. I think I know as a younger coach, I kind of made some assumptions about my players' basketball IQ, and it wasn't there, and I didn't know why they were doing what they did. And I found that it's because they didn't really watch film, or they didn't really understand a lot of some of the nuances or things that I saw. And that was something I kind of had to work on as a coach. And it sounds like that's something that you're doing and continuing to do, is kind of build up your players' IQ, which it seems like in turn will also build that trust that you have in them on the court.
Yeah, and I think that's a mistake. I think as coaches, we all make assumptions about players and certain things. And, I've made assumptions, myself with, certain things that, they just know that. And, it turns out that you get out there and you're like, oh, they didn't, so oops. I think the biggest thing is and if you can take anything from this, is the self-reflection as a coach. the only way we get better is through our failures. And I think I think head coaches have a lot of pressure on them not to fail. But the need to fail is something that will make us better. And I've had plenty of failure moments with my staff. I've had plenty of failure moments where I didn't call a timeout when I should have, or I let them play when they shouldn't have. But the beauty of this coaching game and the beauty of basketball and how it relates so much to life is our growth from all that stuff. So I really I think the quicker we can have a self-reflection moment and an understanding of that, then the better off and better coaches we're going to be, and the better coaches will be for these young men that are just aspiring to go past high school or play at the college level or even pro level for that matter.
Yeah, and because at that point you're teaching them so much more than just basketball things at that point, for sure. A couple things I wanted to kind of quickly get your thoughts on before we hit our concluding segment. What's kind of your philosophy or thoughts on fouling towards the end of the game? Is there a certain thing where it's like, all right, we're down a couple and it's only a minute left, but I know this guy probably isn't a great foul shooter, so we're just going to foul right away and just get him on the line versus, seeing what happens. I know some things might be a little different because you don't have a shot clock, but in general, when it comes to your fouling practices, how do you kind of go about playing that chess match?
I know that what you really want to ask is when you're up 3.
Well, there's that too.
Up 3. I think my philosophy's changed over the years. Obviously, if you're down a minute or down 6 with a minute left, your margin for you're running out of time. So we're probably going to look to foul, especially if we can get the ball in a terrible free throw shooter. We're probably going to take the chance that guy's probably going to miss over on, going to trap, and then we miss a rotation, you get a layup or, a wide open layup. So over the years, I've been a little bit more prone to foul. If we're in a reach, we're going to try and extend the game out as much as we can. Obviously, if we're out of reach, I'm not just going to start fouling because, I think we should necessarily, win the game. But if we're in reach, we're definitely, and some less time left, we're going to look to try and extend the game as much as possible. It's to give ourselves a chance to win or get in the position to win. So I do agree on fouling. Now, over the years, the up 3,
that was going to be my next one. So you knew where I was going.
Early on, I was not a fan of it. The more and more that the analytics kind of show, I've kind of made a push towards it. Now, luckily, I've never really had to make that call in the 4 years as a head coach. So I haven't really done it. I've let the time run out a few times. And that was maybe because I just felt, they were going to force something that wasn't even going to be remotely near a shot. But I think a good execution type team that has a chance to have really good 3-point shooters. I know as an assistant, as a varsity, we got burned on it a few times. So I will lean probably towards the fouling. But like anything, I do think it takes practice.
That is true. Yes, I agree.
My team last year probably gave up a crap ton of offensive rebounds after free throws. So I probably wouldn't have done it last year. I think that's also a good rebounding team. Are you a good rebounding team? Because if they're going to shoot free throws and they miss, you better get that rebound. So otherwise you're probably going to lose. And then everybody thinks you're an idiot because you're fouling, but
yeah,
I think that also comes into play. Whether you're a good rebounding team when we're not booming in the hype department in our realm over here for next year. So, that might be a factor that comes into it too. And we're a better defensive team to make you shoot a tough contested shot, or we might even get a steal off of it. So I could see myself maybe letting it play out, this year, or, if we can become a better rebounding team on our free throws, that might be something that we might lean towards. But I think overall my philosophy is kind of changed into, if you're up 3 and they have the ball, foul.
Yeah.
I'm
Numbers
always
bear it out, huh?
I'm always a big component too is how many fouls you got to give too. So letting them catch, dribble it up here, and then foul, and maybe they have to take it out of bounds on the side, and that's harder. That's a lot of pressure for a high school kid to throw that ball in. When you have when you put the biggest guy on there, you might be able to get a steal off of that and protect your lead too, or get a steal just to get your steal to maybe make it a game. So those are different ways that you can do it with your foul situations. Do you use the fouls to give? Do you don't? And going from there. But those are kind of the things that I've kind of learned and evolved from throughout the year.
Awesome. And then finally, before we hit our concluding segment, I'm not going to have you give up your whole playbook, but when you are looking to draw up a quick hitter, in general, what sort of action do you like best? Do you like to free up a shooter, get screens? Do you like to try and get a layup? In general, what have you found has been the most successful type of action when you're trying to run a quick hitter on offense?
My first year, my point guard was very good in the open. So I probably would have drawn something up to get him kind of going downhill with a shooter on the side. That way, if he does get stopped, he has a nice little kick or someone looping around. My second year, or my second and third year, I had a kid he's 1,000-point scorer. He could really fill it. I mean, he could shoot it, and there wasn't a shot. His name was DeMarcus Vaughn, and I had another shooter, Jalen Petty, was 6'6" shooter. He was kind of played as a wing, and then my point guard, Janai Griffin, was very good at finding them. So a lot of times I would draw things up to get Janai in the open floor and maybe get them going off a pick and pop or a down screen that I would probably draw up for them. This year I got a lot of different talent, a lot of different just different options. I probably would bring one of my shooters off. His name's Marcus Northern, or Tyler Davis in the corner. But I'm more of if I'm drawing something up at the end of the game, it also depends how I feel like the other team is going to guard the action. Are they going to stick to, my best player or the best shooter? So do I run him off a diversion and really have a kind of like a misdirection set, and look to go back door, or look to slip a screen, or have a guy that I think can shoot it, pick and pop? I think it all depends on your personnel, and it really all depends on how the defense is going to guard you. I know a lot of times I've used a high ball screen and put one of my better shooters as the screener. So I have him always tell him to pick and pop, and make that other guy go downhill. Meanwhile, I'm running another guy off of the screen, and that's the guy we're really looking at. So there's different things, simple back screen cut. Sometimes, back screen scores. Do you need a 2 or a 3? Sometimes you run that shooter off that diversion, and really they're looking for a nice little misdirection back screen, to get a quick little 2. Those are some of my favorite things to draw up at the end of the game. But it also depends on your personnel and how teams defend. And I think you don't really know. You have ideas, and you might have quick hitters that I like to before games. I know I'm going over time, but I like to. Oh no, you're all good. I like to before games also have 2 or 3 things that I probably have drawn out if I needed 2, if I needed 3, just that I go over, and it might change every game depending on who we're playing. If I've done enough film watch, I know how they're probably going to defend in action, or who they're going to guard or focus on, or if I believe what the coach is going to do. I'll have 2 or 3 things drawn out beforehand that if I need something, I might go to, at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the game. And there's always stuff that you have, that you call out that you run normally that you think that you can score on, that might have 3 or 4 options that they have. You let the kids make a read and go from there. But it all depends. If you got a guy that can get to the basket, sometimes you want to get him in the open floor to make a play. You got shooters, you know, you might want to use them as a diversion, or you might want to get them a shot, or, you know, use it to get a nice little back screen cut, or, you know, that guy who, you know, who sets the screen pop. I think one of the most it's becoming a lot of Unguardo is a nice double stagger away. There's so many things you can do off of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, you can have the guy coming around off a double screen, but also set a nice little fade screen for the top screener. So those are different things that you can do. But I think that double stagger screen is becoming something that you're starting to see is something that can be used as an end of the game tactic to even open the floor.
Yeah, definitely. And I think two really good points that you just kind of brought up in general, just really know your personnel and know what they're capable of and what they can do. And then also know who you're playing against. And like you said, the more you prepare, the more film you have on them, the more you know how they like to defend certain actions, the better quick hitter, the better play you'll probably be able to draw up there at the end. So really good insights there. Awesome. And then, Coach, to wrap up, there's a couple questions I ask every guest. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this first one. Looking back on your coaching career, what is a coaching moment of yours that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
I think for me, I my first year, you know, we kind of hit the ground running. We were 5-6-0 to start the season, and I mean we were holding teams to a very low rate. You know, I talked about making their presence known in the state and getting ranked, and we did that. We accomplished it. We were in the top 10 in the state. You know, early on, I think the biggest carryover from that is sometimes you can teach a team how to hunt and be the underdog, but you don't teach them how to deal with success. So that was a teaching point for me, for me going on. To kind of focus on that, you got to teach them how to deal with the highs and the lows. You know, it's very, you know, you want to keep climbing and keep going towards the peak. You want to stay out of the valleys. So, you know, that's something that I learned early on. And another one that is a teaching moment is, you know, your assistants, coaching your assistants, giving them challenges, giving them things to do. This is not a democracy by any means. As a head coach, you know, you got to utilize your assistants for their talents and what they're really good at. And give them that opportunity for them to shine and move forward too, and go from there. And if you're not working not only for your players, you're working for your assistants. So as a head coach, you got to be able to do that.
Yeah, I like the idea of doing what you can to put your assistants in positions for them to be successful. And I think summer in particular, it's always been a really good time that I've noticed where you see like a lot of that happening, or just little situations you can find to give them that sort of experience. So it's really good. And the idea of being successful. I think of like situations where coaches have like turned programs around and they've done a really good job at that. And then they start facing success, and then that brings on like its own challenges. Like, wait a minute, we're a lot more successful than we ever have before, and kind of like these new things come up that are its own unique things that you deal with when you have a successful program as well. So that's good. And then, Coach, to wrap up, I give every guest what I call a 60-second soapbox. You can go over. I'm not timing you. To get out your final message, a closing thought, a closing idea that you want to leave the listeners with. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to you, and you can take it from here.
All right. Well, I mean, I really don't have too much. I mean, I think anybody listening, you're obviously listening here to get better. And I think as coaches, that's the greatest thing that you can do. Is I think sometimes we want to be the best coach, and you want to be I want to be the coach, you know, that players that want to play for and go from there. But I think if you have an overall message, you know, we don't do this for the pay. We do it because we love the game, and two, we do it for the young men or women that we coach, and to put them in a situation where they can be successful or use basketball as a vessel to be successful. So I think we do a disservice as coaches when we're not trying to grow daily as a person, whether it be in, X's and O's, practices, anything. If you're not trying to grow as a coach, and you think you know it all, then you're probably either one, you're not really a good coach, or it's about time that you probably retire. But I think all the great ones, and I think of guys like Coach K, and you think about how and I'm a North Carolina fan, so this is going to really bug me. But if you think about something that he constantly does, I watched a podcast on him. He's always evolved, and he's evolved the game, with the one and dones and things like that. I think that is the biggest tool that we can do as coaches is learn from each other. And actually, I'm going to they're calling it a think tank with about 18 other coaches in the state down in Indy tomorrow, where we're just sitting in a boardroom and we're just talking basketball and exchanging X's and O's. And I think that is the greatest thing that as coaches we can do, is share what we're good at and our strengths. And I think you find a lot about yourself, about your weaknesses. I found a lot about my weaknesses just through the Zoom meetings and all the stuff that I'm not very good at. And I'm still growing. This is my 5th year as a head coach. I still don't know it all, and I'm still learning, and our program is still evolving. And I think if you're not looking for a constant way to better your program or better yourself so you can better your program, or the ways that your program can be better. I mean, just today, my sister and I were talking about, what we can do to get our weight training program better. What can we get guys to dial in? You got to constantly look at ways that you can get things to be better. And I think as coaches, if you're not doing that, or you're too prideful, I really think you're doing your program a disservice, and I really think you're doing the kids a disservice. This is a beautiful game, and it's probably the game that most mirrors life to me. And there's so many teaching moments. And I think as much as we can teach that these kids that are, it's bigger than basketball, the better off, you're going to be as a coach, and the successful athletes and the successful people you have in society the players you coach go on to be in society is everything.
Yeah,
I'm off my soapbox on that.
That's beautifully. No, it's well put. It's so much more than basketball, I feel like. I think that's great. And yeah, I like the idea of always learning. And just to really quickly just add on to that, I think that the better we get as coaches, the better players and better people we get to create in return. And so I can't think of anything better than that. So no, that's really well put. Coach, I want to thank you for spending some time talking about your program, talking about some late game execution, some things you do in practice, kind of your coaching philosophy in general, and of course, a little bit about the shot clock as well, because that's always good to talk about too. So I appreciate that. Hopefully you have a safe season. Hopefully everything goes as smooth as possible, and best of luck going forward. Coach Varga, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.